Normally I reserve any in-depth critique or other critical commentary for when a game is released, whether as a fully complete version or in a early access state. In my opinion, if you as a developer are ready to charge money for a game, then you are ready to receive reviews and critique of your game from any interested parties or pundits, in this case, me. However, in this particular instance, none of this applies. Today what you're looking at on your screen is Generation Zero, a currently in development game being developed and published by Avalanche Studios, the developers behind games like Mad Max and the Just Cause series. Now if you know anything about Just Cause especially, you know you're in for quite a bit of fun. Avalanche Studios is a Nordic-based studio owned by its parent company Nordisk Film, under its smaller brands, Nordisk Film Games, a division described as making equity investments in Nordic-based development studios. After working on several licensed games, most of which were met with commercial success and mostly positive critical receptions, Avalanche now seems to be turning its attention towards not only developing, but also publishing new original titles of their own, with Generation Zero being their newest original IP in years. With a vague anticipated release window of 2019, the dev team have made it clear that while Generation Zero may be far along in development, much work still has to be done before the game can be considered ready to go gold and be publicly released on digital storefronts. Now I was lucky enough to be privately granted early access to the closed beta of Generation Zero recently, with carte blanche permission to freely record or stream the game at will, something that most developers are fairly reluctant to do, with most similar private, pre-alpha, or beta stress test games requiring players to agree to a non-disclosure agreement in order to play, with some developers enforcing their NDAs more aggressively than Nintendo when releasing a new Mario or a Zelda game. I always find it rather refreshing to be able to go in and document a game's progress from its earliest days and see that game continue to expand and evolve from just a simple demonstration of its core mechanics to, in many cases, eventually fulfilling the complete vision of the developer and leaving early access as a complete game. Now, a game usually enters a beta period following the pre-alpha and alpha stages, the former being the earliest period of the game's development where the core mechanics are still being worked on, and the alpha generally being the period that the development focus begins to shift from working on the broader elements such as finalizing character model designs, greatly improving the in-game AI by expanding or reworking AI pathfinding and player interaction, etc. Betas are mostly viewed as the tech demo phase where the developer attempts to shift focus towards bug fixes, optimization overhaul, etc. And this is the phase we find ourselves in now. So the question becomes, by these rough parameters, how well does Generation Zero measure up? Does it show enough promise to be worth consideration, or is it just the latest in a long line of overachieving failures we've seen in the gaming industry? Well, I'm not going to hold you in too much suspense on any of these points, because yes, Generation Zero might be one of 2019's greatest sleeper hits, and I'll explain why. Now before we get into gameplay, I do want to quickly highlight a very interesting detail that they added into the menu of the game, which does make it easier for the average gamer to adjust their settings to accommodate their PC's system specs. In the game's options menu, in addition to all the basic necessities like an FOV slider, graphical settings such as the texture quality scaling, anti-aliasing, VSync support, and ambient occlusion, the player is also provided with brief text descriptions outlining the purpose of each option and how your chosen settings may have a heavy or light impact on your game's performance. Now this is definitely a plus in my book, and I thank the developers for taking the time to add this small but noticeable detail, and something that I wish more games did. I've only owned a few games that actually provide this level of functionality, so credit to the developers for not overlooking this minor but extremely helpful detail. Okay, that said, let's stop looking at the options menu and get straight into gameplay. Now there are some balancing problems worth mentioning here, starting with loot drops. As with most games of this nature, enemies will, after being killed, drop loot that can be collected by the player, in this case coming in the form of ammunition, gun scopes, and other similar supplies. While players can find most if not all of these resources in other locations, looting enemy bodies is easily the most effective means of keeping your ammo and health well supplied. Now on its own, there's nothing wrong with that system. However, should a player run out of ammo for any reason, such as I did when going to my inventory screen to equip my shotgun, which for some reason triggered a bug with my pistol, instantly wiping out my over 100 bullet supply, you will find it nearly impossible to regain ammo as the game, for whatever reason, does not allow you to resupply at one of your spawn points, forcing you and or your teammates to waste needless time running around the map, frantically trying to find some new, as of yet untapped, source of ammo that just happens to match your gun type. Different guns take different kinds of ammo, so even if you happen to chance upon an ammo box, there is no guarantee it's going to be the kind of ammo that you desperately need. Now this is kind of a small critique, I just wanted to point it out because this is the kind of thing that I would hope gets fixed in the alpha phase, ammo balancing and that sort of thing. So I just want to clarify that I don't think of the game any less because of this issue, but I felt it was worth talking about for anyone who might be interested in purchasing this game later on. Now speaking of guns, players will quickly, during the first hour or two of play, will gain access to a small but diverse amount of weapons, including a pistol, a shotgun, and an SMG. While I personally was unable to locate an SMG in time for this video, I have picked up dozens if not hundreds of SMG bullets, so it's probably a safe bet to say the game does feature an SMG. Just a guess. Considering this game is still roughly a year away from its public release, there is already a decent amount of enemy variety, with so far 3 different types of enemies in the game, as far as I've seen. Since I have no idea what they're actually called, I'm going to nickname them here and hope some of it is close enough. You have the Panther, a 4-legged animalistic robot that tends to equip mid to long range, slow-firing, semi-automatic mounted guns. The Panthers seem to avoid directly confronting the player, and when the player opens fire on them, it will move a few yards in one direction or the other to get out of the player's immediate line of sight. Kind of a clever tactic if I do say so myself, and I've really enjoyed playing against them. While not overtly dangerous on their own, the Panthers do tend to pop up in small groups of 2 to 4, where they are at their most dangerous, as while you may focus on one, the others will focus on flanking around you in an effort to encircle and kill you, so not good. You have the Roaches, small bug-like robotic creatures that remind me of a mix between a Half-Life headcrab and a Portal turret. Yes, I do like my Valve references, but hey, this is what happens to come to mind when I'm recording the video, and some of this is kind of spur of the moment, so we're going to kind of make it up as we go along. And finally you have the Probe, a floating, non-aggressive droid who usually appear during or after a conflict between the player and the AI bots, presumably to summon reinforcements. I say presumably because I generally prefer to shoot the droids down before they get an opportunity to phone home. These enemies do offer a decent amount of variety for what is essentially a starter area for the game, and they do fill out what is otherwise an almost completely abandoned world, mostly devoid of meaningful exploration, side questing, etc. Now let's talk about that open world. Like many open world RPG games, you initially start out with a small portion of the map, before eventually defeating some enemies, then discovering and claiming an in-game hub, in this case a safe house, which from that point on you can fast travel to from any point in the map. This is good because you can reduce the grind associated with backtracking that is irritatingly commonly associated with games like this. However, while that solves one problem, there is another problem left unresolved. The game's navigation system is atrociously, often hilariously bad. To illustrate this, I want to show you this ridiculous example that presented itself to me early on. After venturing off the beaten path and onto this obscure dirt path that I assumed would lead me to a farm that I had to get to as part of my quest, I ended up spending nearly a quarter hour venturing up and down and around a mountain, and as I did, I quickly came to the realization that this was likely not where I was supposed to go, but deciding to take a chance, I continued venturing forward, hoping that maybe, just maybe, the developers may have added this path leading to some kind of obscure Easter egg for those who decided to go wandering. So I continued. As I went, I got more excited because, you know, path maybe leads to some kind of cave or cool explorable area with like some kind of Easter egg. That's what I thought anyway. The path ended up leading me to this rocky area looking out upon the water. I explored this area for a couple minutes, tried to trigger some kind of Easter egg, and nothing. Just nothing. I mean, come on, Avalanche, you'll gladly put invisible walls all over the map, but for some reason, you deliberately designed this random, super long, meaningless trail, bringing players all the way out here for seemingly no explainable reason. This is an Easter egg spot just waiting to happen, come on. I'm telling you, do something with this area, because no one's going to come looking for it. The reason why I mentioned this side story, humorous as it is because it kind of illustrates the needless time wasting you may be doing in the game. And often, a lot of it can be very easily corrected, such as when you're undergoing a quest. The quest structure usually plays out like this. Find this location, defeat any enemies guarding it, explore that location until you find a note or some kind of lore material, pick it up, and then wait for the game to assign you a new goal. But the problem is that while you can pick up notes, maps, and other narrative material, which presumably will indicate the location of your next destination, you don't seem to be able to read or listen to any of it, forcing you the player to idly wander around the world until you happen to stumble across the right location completely by accident. I'm sorry to say it, but this is kind of just bad game design. And I get it, the game is still in development, I'm not saying it's complete, Lord knows it's not complete, but this is the kind of problem that I'm not surprised to see, just kind of disappointed to see. But it's one that I do think can be resolved, and I hope it does get corrected soon. What I think would be more interesting is allow the player to read collected notes and maps, and allow them to use both alongside one another in order to pinpoint the correct point of interest. Think something similar to Papers, Please, where in this case, the player is given a notebook which holds all of your collected notes on one side and a map on the other. In our example, say the player was looking for a factory. The note describes how the factory is roughly 20 kilometers southeast from a town, 5 kilometers west of a forest. You, the player, would click over the mouse to mark the name of the factory in the notebook and drag your mouse over to that spot on the map. If you guessed correctly, a pin will appear on the map with a string marking the connection between the notebook and the map. This is a bit extravagant, but this is just one example of how a developer can create a dynamic minigame in order to involve the player in the process of discovering new map locations, without forcing the player into participating in unnecessary tedious grind, which can have the unfortunate effect of turning some players off from playing further. Other games like the Batman Arkham games or Rockstar's LA Noire have alternatively created their own logical minigames like a detective mode to accomplish a similar effect. Now, I should clarify that the grind can be somewhat reduced when spread out among a 4-player multiplayer group, as the game was initially balanced around the inclusion of 4-player co-op, but from that perspective, looking at the game from a multiplayer angle, other contrasting issues arise. Resource hogging among players becomes an issue, combat would now be short and uninteresting, and communication would be a requirement. This is not a game I would play with random groups online, but only with specific friends. There are some other small qualms I have with the game, but I think I've outlined most of my major concerns. If I were to sit here and go point by point on every point of interest that comes to mind, you'd have to put me on tenure because I'm not going anywhere. Would I be willing to play more Generation Zero? Yes, definitely. Should the developers really start to fill out this massive world with more enemies, more resources, more side questing, etc., I'd be more than happy to continue playing this game in both single player and multiplayer. I do plan to deliver a lot of this feedback to the developers directly, but I just wanted to present this game to you all and see what you all think of Gen Zero. My question for you would be, would you buy Generation Zero, and if not, what are your reservations about it? If you like this video, you know the deal. Please hit that like button and be sure to subscribe and opt into getting notifications so you can be among the first to know when I upload a new video. This has been WarriorDan signing out. Stay awesome, everybody, and peace out.